The remains of 11 women were found. 11 women were found. After years of investigating, still no arrests have been made in the case, and now investigators are saying there are more suspects than they originally thought.
Hey, word on the street, I'm a suspect. Hanging with the killers in the projects. Taylor want a barrel, keep quiet. Catch a nigga slipping from behind. OG, Bobby, Johnson.
Hey y'all, hey, we are back with another SW and true crime video, but today we will be finishing part 2 of our West Mesa bone collector case. If you haven't checked out part 1, this is now your time to check out part 1 of the case. This is my first serial killer case and my first 2-parter, so I thank y'all so much for all the love and support. This case is gonna be kind of a little different from what I do because I thought I can combine all this information into one short video. It was not happening, so I had to record like new outros and new intros to make this a 2-parter. So I hope y'all enjoyed the case. Again, I want to give a warning that this case does mention rape and some mentions of children. I also want to add that all of my resources are linked below if you would like to join the conversation. And yeah, all this information is public information, and again, I mean no disrespect to the victims or the families. Let's get into part 2 of the West Mesa bone collector case. Days of the investigation, police threw out a number of suggestions for the possible suspects in the West Mesa case.
Be a new clue in the West Mesa murder investigation.
Today, Albuquerque police released photographs of 7 women. Pictures they will only say that they obtained from a source. Some of them are quite disturbing.
10 of the women were involved with drugs and prostitution, and all 11 were last seen between 2003 and 2005. Police say they have a handful of suspects but haven't named any. In August, detectives went to Joplin, Missouri, where they searched the home and business of a man named Ron Irwin in connection with the case. Detectives won't say what they seized from the properties, but Irwin's mother told us that he liked to take pictures and would come to Albuquerque for the state fair and would stay in motels. Police insist that Irwin is not a suspect or even a person of interest. Today, Police Chief Ray Schultz wouldn't elaborate on where these pictures came from. He also said they're not sure if the women are connected to the West Mesa murder case or not, but added that their physical description matched those of the victims. The chief also addressed the 4 pictures of women who don't appear to be awake.
It appears that some of the women may be unconscious. Again, we don't know what that reason is at this point in time, if they were just sleeping or something else had occurred to them.
Investigators wouldn't give out any names, only vague descriptions. Someone in prison, a military man, or possibly a pimp. In July 2009, almost 5 months after the first bone was recovered, then Police Chief Ray Schultz announced that the police had about 5 known suspects. Months later, he said that only a handful of those suspects remained. But whoever those suspects were, police didn't have any substantial evidence to charge them.
We have received close to 1,200 tips on these cases.
A case APD says they've never given up on.
The investigation into what happened to the women on Ida's list has been extensive. Hundreds of people have been interviewed.
Back in 2009, authorities uncovered the bodies of 11 women, with one of them being pregnant, on the West Mesa near 118th Street.
In 2014, KRQE 13 named Joseph Blee, and Lorenzo Montoya as 2 men who haven't been ruled out. Police confirmed that a year later, both of these men were suspects very early in the investigation. Although it does remain unclear who the other suspects may be, I did find a few sources. I'm not sure if they were credible, but they are some sources that talk about the possible suspects. From my research on watching that YouTube video and other YouTube videos, some believe that it could have been someone on the police force, or someone who did construction in the area that knew that site pretty well. In 2019, police spokesperson Tanner Tixier said the list was as big as 20 names. As the years wore on and the case remained unsolved, Dan Valdez, Michelle's father, became a de facto spokesperson for the group of families. But he fell ill from cancer and liver problems in 2014 and unfortunately passed away only 3 months after the Journal interviewed him in late January 2015. At the time of the interview, he said he was patiently waiting for them to catch the killer. A gardener named Joseph Blair is a strong possible suspect of this case. In 2015, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison for a rape case that he committed in the 1980s. It was his ex-wife, April Gillen, who told Albuquerque police to investigate him, as Joseph had previously been accused of raping a 14-year-old with a screwdriver. Aside from this, Joseph's DNA was found on the remains of a deceased worker in the area. He would also expose himself and stalk women along Central Avenue. Joseph was well known to local law enforcement as they had encountered him more than 100 times over a 20-year period. Most of these encounters occurred in areas that had a reputation with a lot of S-workers. He first became a suspect in the case. A surveillance team tailed him and noted that he appeared to be circling around the streets stalking S-workers. His luck finally ran out when he was arrested for aggravated assault following a domestic dispute at his house. Once the police arrived, they found rope as well as electrical tape on his passenger seat in his car. Following his arrest, his DNA was entered into the CODIS database. A few months later, the system connected him with 2 violent crimes that had taken place in the 1980s. One was the 1985 murder of an S-worker. The other was the rape of a 13-year-old girl in 1989. Sadly, he could not be charged for the murder because the statute of limitations had passed. Although the police had enough evidence to immediately arrest him and charge him for the case, they decided to hold off a bit. By the time the DNA match was made, Joseph Blair was already a suspect in the West Mesa case. During the investigation, Joseph admitted to police that he knew some of the victims because he had previously hired them. Joseph's own cellmate told police officers that he would call the deceased women trashy, degrading them on the basis of their involvement in S-work. As of today, Joseph is currently serving a 90-year prison sentence after he was convicted of 4 sexual assaults unrelated to the West Mesa case.
A masked man in her home after school. Now, her rape kit was not tested until 2010, which led investigators to Blair. Blair has been accused of several rapes back in the 1980s and 90s near McKinley Middle School.
They called him the McKinley Middle School rapist. Here's APD spokeswoman Nadine Hamby.
It's just mind-boggling how you can look at this man and even think of him as a human. He's an animal.
Blair is also a suspect in a very large case that's gained national attention. As we've learned and reported last year, Blair is a suspect in the West Mesa murders. Evidence against Blair, his DNA was found on the jeans of a prostitute who was killed and dumped off East Central in the late 1980s. News 13 also learned a tag for a tree bought at an Albuquerque nursery was discovered in the makeshift graves. Blair, who worked as a landscaper, was a frequent shopper at the nursery. Police have never charged him or anybody else in the West Mesa murders.
Lorenzo Montoya was the other key suspect in this case. However, Lorenzo died in 2006 before any of the West Mesa bone collector victims were found. He had a history of lurking in the area as well as picking up S-workers to basically assault them. In other words, he would pick up an S-worker, a full service S-worker, and act like he's, wanting a service, and he would proceed to strangle them. In December 2006, he invited 19-year-old Sherika Hill to dance for him at his trailer. But unknowing to him, her boyfriend, 18-year-old Frederick Williams, was outside waiting for her. She was bound by the ankles, knees, and wrist with duct tape and cord, a detective wrote in the warrant. When Sherika's boyfriend came in to check on her and saw the condition of her, Frederick shot and killed Lorenzo. Sherika's body was found outside of Montoya's trailer, partially wrapped in a blanket. Her legs and wrists were bound with duct tape, and a thick layer was around her neck. An unrolled condom, pillowcase, as well as Sherika's belongings were all found to be in a trash bag in the back of the car that Montoya was renting. Authorities did not charge Frederick for Montoya's death. Inside Montoya's trailer, investigators found duct tape next to his bed. Also found some hardcore corn with a P and some of his homemade sexy tapes. One of those recordings shows Montoya having sex with the woman, and the tape fades to black. In a following scene on the same tape, the camera is now focused to Montoya's bedroom wall. The camera doesn't capture what's quite happening, but the audio clearly, you could clearly hear that there was tape being pulled back from the roll. In the same clip, you could hear at least one trash bag being opened, as well as some rustling noises. Police have sent that audio to the FBI and other crime labs for enhancement, but haven't been able to determine what Lorenzo was doing in the background. Lorenzo was also reported by the girlfriend for physically abusing his girlfriend and threatening to kill her and bury her in lime. When Lorenzo Montoya was killed in 2006, the victims in the West Mesa were not found as of yet. Police Chief Ray Schultz said at the time police had been looking for him in connection to S-workers who had vanished from the city. That's likely because, like the other possible suspect, Joseph Blair, Montoya would cruise around the East Central Corridor and was known to be violent, especially toward S-workers. Montoya's first solicitation arrest was back in 1998, where he picked up an undercover detective, thinking it was a full-service S-worker. He then offered her $40. She took him to a hotel room near Washington and Central, where she then and other officers arrested him. But that did not deter him at all. In 1999, Vice detectives watched him pick up an S-worker near Central and San Mateo and follow him to a dark, dead-end road near the airport. Police believe they caught him in the act as he was trying to rape and strangle her. Montoya had apparently never intended to pay her because they found only $2 in his wallet. He was arrested, but later the case was dismissed. But about 4 years later, he still was at it. By that time, Montoya had a history of violence, and honestly, a known history of violence to the police. Police spokesperson Tanner Tixier said detectives tested Montoya's living room for carpet DNA of all of the victims found on the Mesa, and it came back negative. They also found nothing suspicious in his financial records at the time the women went missing. Police announced in October 2016 that they were looking for 2 escorts or 2 S-workers that was shown in one of his homemade S-tapes. We need these 2 women identified, Tixier said. We're trying to figure out if they're still alive.
Montoya was shot dead in December of 2006. The same year, the unusual disappearances seemed to stop. He had a history of violence, and on the night he was killed, investigators say Montoya had hired an escort whom he strangled to death in his trailer.
I've received over 1,100 tips since that first day 12 years ago. We continue to get tips, about 20 or 30 a year now.
For the families of the victims, it's been a long wait for justice. Today, Acting Lieutenant Anderson says there are no new suspects. Detectives are still working the case.
What can you say to even the victims' families, the general public who's losing hope that this will ever be solved?
That's one thing that happens with homicides and cold case homicides is that you should always have hope for them. There is no statute of limitations on them, and we work them as a department until they're solved.
APD says it just needs the right tip to solve one of our city's most infamous and dark mysteries.
Overall, the killer liked to keep bones or tokens from his victims, hence the West Mesa bone collector. All of this information helped provide investigators with a lot of possible avenues for investigation, but most of it, when paired together, made it absolutely difficult to digest. After all, this was roughly a 2-year time span in the time that 11 women had been killed, most of whom lived off the grid and kept low profiles, not only legally, but personally. This was a killer that seemed to strike indiscriminately, I guess, targeting easy people that he could find. This was a killer that may have kept mementos of his victims, or someone who honestly had the knowledge or skill to completely erase and get rid of all evidence that could lead back to him. And finally, this was a killer who chose to kill by hand, not by using weapons, not by using a gun or a knife, which made some people say that this specific killer could have been the same person as the Long Island Strangler, which I will cover soon as well.
Have eliminated many suspects. At this time, there are a number of people who are being investigated as persons of interest.
Thompson didn't go into detail on the other suspects, but did say most of them have stemmed from tips, all of which they take very seriously.
If you have any information related to these murdered and missing women, please contact the Albuquerque Police Department.
As usual, I will offer my tips that may be helpful. For starters, make sure you do a proper screening or double check everything. Make sure your I's are dotted. You have I was about to just say this old saying my mom was saying, make sure you dot all your I's and you cross every T. Make sure there's no missing information. You may feel like the sites do a good job, but quite frankly, they really don't. You may need to go the extra mile in taking a precaution because it could ultimately save your life. I believe that there's SWers forums, Reddit forums, Twitter threads that actually out clients that may have made them feel uneasy, or if the client is predatory in any way. Next, please be aware of your surroundings and make sure to share your location with a family and make sure to share your location with a trusted person or a family member. Me personally, I have my location on for my mother, my brother, my college best friend, my at-home best friends, and my friend in the area, as well as an SWers friend. So I have people that have my location that's checking for me in different lights. Some people are closer than the other. So I would definitely make sure that you have a support system where people can know your location at all times. Last but not least, I would recommend to carry protection if you can. Carrying protection is extremely vital these days, whether it is a gun or whether it is bear mace or whether it is pepper spray. You just need something on you for protection. As for the case, I'm hoping that more information comes out. Dirk Gibson, a professor at the University of New Mexico, he's known for just a plethora of his serial killer books, his true crime books. He suspects that the West Mesa bone collector did not have a personal motive, but instead was a commercial serial killer who disposed of women in exchange for money. Some people think it may have been a police officer or any type of police official that knew the area well as just many spots that S workers were in. Others believe that this case could have been linked to the Long Island Strangler case that was known in the 90s. Researching this case, I found a lot of official documentation. However, I did not see a lot of conversation about this case. Yes, this case may have been almost 20 years ago, but the conversation still needs to be had because honestly, they're not truly sure who to pin these murders on. I just want to clearly say S work isn't a last resort occupation or a last resort profession. S work is oftentimes the best resort for disabled people or people that have had their door slammed in their face too many times. But a lot of times people miss that S workers are, just doing this because they don't have a job. They don't have any skills. They don't have any credibility, no work experience, no degree, no certifications. And half the time, S workers are either more qualified than their counterparts. And a lot of people don't know that because of the S work name. As I've stated in a lot of videos, S work ranges in so much, and it's not to just full service. It can be being a cam girl, it can be being a stripper. S work is just so huge, so huge, and it's not limited to anyone, to anything, and it's not derogatory. Being an S worker is nothing wrong with it. It's a profession, just like a garbage man. It's the same. The same thing, Anyway, S work is diverse and should not have the stigma that people need to be saved from S work. I found a lot of help center numbers for S workers when I was researching a lot of these articles, which there is nothing wrong for having those help resources, but it's very interesting. And it reminds me of the Tyler Perry movie with Keisha Pullings, I believe is this movie. Where they just felt like they needed to save her. And half the time, yes, some full service S workers are involved in drugs. It gave me that harsh outlook of how S workers look to the public. And from somebody that has multiple degrees, I went into S work on my own. I wasn't pushed into S work. Here's a good post I found about S workers and just that whole dynamic, because I think we need more conversation about that. A lot of people think people are survival sex workers, we need to run to sex work to be saved, and then we need somebody to save us from this horrible reality of S work, and that's not the case at all. There's some people that want to do S work because they want to do it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me with another SW and true crime video. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this case. I'm not sure if this will be a two-parter or not. I'm not sure if this will be just a long video or not. I'm gonna check it out and make sure. So if it is a two-parter, thank y'all for sticking around with me for part 1 and part 2. If not, thank y'all for sticking around anyway. Make sure you go like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you turn on that notification bell so you can know when I'm posting next. Comment what cases you want me to cover next. Also go find my socials and go look at my little clips of my cases there if you want a quick synopsis of this. And yeah, thank y'all so much for tuning in with me today, and I hope y'all have a happy holiday. And yeah, see y'all in the new year, possibly see y'all sooner. Bye.